Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, get ready, because we have this incredible stack of material today. We're talking articles, research notes, some really insightful observations, all focused on one unique place.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I'm already buzzing, actually.
It's a good set. This dive is taking us deep into a specific desert region. We're going to be pulling apart, the layers of history, the geography, which is pretty stark,
Right.
and the story, really, of how people have interacted with this, well, pretty challenging environment over time.
So our mission is to dive into these sources specifically. We want to cut through the noise, pull out the essential knowledge, and maybe uncover some of those surprising insights, the things that make you rethink the area.
Exactly. And it's going to be quite a journey, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We'll start way back in the ancient past, look at some specific archaeological finds,
Yeah.
secrets even,
Ooh, secrets.
and trace old trade routes, look at the modern challenges, the potential of living there now, and then really get into the environment itself. It's pretty extreme.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with a place really rooted in that desert past. En Gedi, Tel Gorin, as the archaeologists call it.
That's the one.
Just looking at the map, the geography, you sort of get why people would settle there, right? You've got those fresh springs, which is huge.
Absolutely huge.
Some land you can actually farm, and it's right there on the Dead Sea coast.
Spot on. But, springs alone aren't always enough for a really significant settlement to last. What the sources really emphasize is the accessibility factor.
Ah, okay.
Gedi sits right where these canyons open out onto the Dead Sea Plain. That gives pathways, potentially connecting it inland, maybe towards the southern Hebron Hills. It wasn't just an oasis, it was a point on a route.
Makes sense. And of course, En Gedi, you immediately think of the Bible story, David hiding from Saul in the cave.
Right, that's the connection everyone makes. Now, researchers debate which cave, or if it was a specific cave, but the story is definitely tied to this area, this landscape.
So tracing the history there from the archaeology, it goes way back.
It does, surprisingly far. There's evidence of a First Temple period settlement, found near the modern kibbutz, actually.
Okay.
Then, a distinct village in the Second Temple period, right there at Tel Gorin itself. That one seems to have been abandoned probably around 70 CE.
Right, around the destruction of the Second Temple. But that wasn't the end for En Gedi.
Not at all. The finds indicate that a Jewish presence returned, looks like by the 3rd century CE.
Okay, so a couple of centuries later.
Yeah. And this return, it seems to be part of a bigger picture, a wider trend happening across the region then.
Mm-hmm.
During the Roman and Byzantine periods, you see Jewish villages starting to grow in the southern part of the country,
Interesting.
often alongside Christian and pagan communities, actually. This happens, as the main center of Jewish leadership is shifting away from Jerusalem, mostly up north to the Galilee, places like Nazareth, Tiberias.
In the Byzantine period, that was generally a big population boom time across the country, wasn't it? One of the most densely populated before modern times.
Definitely. It seems linked to things like, increased pilgrimage, the growth of Christian communities, general stability for a while.
Right.
And the community at En Gedi really flourished during this time. It lasted until the 6th, maybe even the 7th century. They even did a major renovation of their synagogue in the 6th century.
Wow.
It's worth noting, though, the exact timing of when this sort of boom really picks up steam, 3rd, 4th, 5th century, it kind of varies depending on the specific site. That's still something scholars are digging into.
So, centuries of life there. But eventually it did decline. After the early Islamic period, say 7th to 9th centuries.
Yeah, it seems the area, this immediate desert region, was largely abandoned around then.
Oh,
Most sites did decline.
Okay.
Though, interestingly, some places like Jericho, further north, they managed to keep a presence going. You even find mixed Jewish and non-Jewish or Muslim communities there into the 8th and 9th centuries. And you also see these old Roman forts along the routes. Sometimes they were briefly reoccupied by different groups near the end before the sort of general decline in settled life right there.
Okay, now this is where it gets really fascinating for me. The secrets inside that 6th century synagogue they found at En Gedi, those mosaic floors.
Yes. And it's important to remember, the original mosaics, the ones they dug up back in the 50s, they're actually housed in the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem now for safekeeping.
Ah, right. So what you see on site are copies.
Exactly. Good copies, they give you the visual, but the real detail, the artifacts, are protected.
And the designs themselves are, well, kind of wild. There's one section with a swastika design.
Yeah, that definitely jumps out.
Now, we know it was a common geometric pattern back then, used lots of places, but seeing it on a synagogue floor is, Well, it's jarring today, right?
It is. Researchers point out it was purely decorative then, a standard geometric filler, not symbolic in the way we unfortunately know it now. But it does speak to the complex mix of cultural motifs at the time.
Absolutely. And you also see these beautiful bird designs.
Yes, lovely stylized birds. That seems to have been a recurring theme in mosaics in this southern region.
And then there are the inscriptions.
Yeah.
Actual writing in the floor.
Which are incredibly revealing. You've got one panel listing the donors, the people who paid for the synagogue, which is pretty standard.
All right.
Then another one gives this really surprising list of biblical lineages. It goes from Adam down to someone named Yeet, which is close to Abraham, but it skips huge chunks.
Adam to Yeet. That's weirdly specific and short. Why those names?
Exactly. It's not a full genealogy. It makes you wonder what was the significance of that particular list to this community. It's a bit of a puzzle.
And then the third inscription. The one with the curse.
Ah, yes, the curse.
Mhm.
This is likely the key to the community's big secret. It's a powerful warning aimed at protecting something valuable.
And what was the secret?
The consensus is that it was related to the production of a special perfume or balsam, probably made from a local plant, maybe related to the famous biblical balsam of Gilead. This was incredibly valuable stuff.
So this village wasn't just surviving, they had a secret industry. Their whole economy might have been built on this.
That's the strong hypothesis. This secret production was likely their financial backbone.
Wow.
And this gives us a really compelling reason for why they came back in the 3rd century. Maybe the people who returned had maintained a connection, perhaps even family ties, or crucially, they held on to the knowledge of how to cultivate this plant and make the perfume.
So the secret itself drew them back?
It's very possible. This wasn't just, a cultural thing. It was the economic engine that let them reestablish and sustain themselves in such a tough place. And they kept it going right through the Roman and Byzantine periods.
That makes so much sense. It gives their persistence a real concrete logic. Did they find anything else there?
Yeah. Researchers also found evidence of an earlier synagogue from the 3rd century, right underneath the 6th century one. Similar layout, but, some differences like where the entrance was.
Uh-huh.
And other finds, too. Things like a small bathhouse, like rooms in a row, suggesting a certain level of, community infrastructure, maybe some comfort.
Right.
The models they've made of the synagogue suggest there might have been an upper gallery, maybe for women and children, which you see in later synagogues. But the archaeological evidence for that gallery isn't totally conclusive, so researchers note that's still kind of an open question.
Okay, let's move south a bit, along those ancient routes that really define this whole area. We come to a site known today as Hazeva.
Right. The modern name, Hazeva, just comes from a local spring there, Ein Hazeva.
And what did archaeologists find there? More layers.
Oh, yes. Significant layers.
Right.
They've uncovered the remains of a pretty substantial Roman fort, but also, really crucially, evidence of a biblical-era fort or settlement underneath the Roman one.
Even though the climate there is incredibly harsh, right? Like really hot summers.
Extremely hot. We're talking potential for 50 degrees Celsius. That's like 122 Fahrenheit. So probably not an ideal place for, large-scale permanent living for everyone year-round.
But it was important.
Hugely important strategically. It was essential as a military outpost. It sat right on a key route and likely functioned as a kind of border zone. Researchers remind us that borders back then weren't lines on a map or fences.
Right.
They were often these areas, these zones of control or influence. The Romans sometimes called them limes.
And this site, Hazeva, many scholars identify it as the biblical Tamar.
That's the leading theory. Now, the Book of Kings mentions King Solomon building a fortress at Tadmor in the wilderness, Tadmor Bamidbar. That usually refers to Palmyra, way up in Syria.
Which is nowhere near here.
Exactly. But the context in Kings lists other places Solomon built in this southern region, near the Arava. So the argument is that Tadmor was likely a scribe's error for Tamar, which fits geographically and historically with Solomon's activities down here.
And this route it sat on, why was it so important?
It was a critical route, especially for accessing Isla, which is modern island, down in the Red Sea. Isla was a major port back then.
A gateway for trade, armies.
Both. A key point for moving commodities and projecting military power into the region or further south.
Who controlled this route, this area, historically?
Well, it likely shifted over time. The historical sources mention strong kings of Judah like Solomon, later Amaziah, Josiah. having control or at least significant influence here at different periods.
Hmm.
It suggests this corridor was strategically vital and probably contested.
And it wasn't just the Israelites or Judeans around here in biblical times, right? This desert wasn't empty.
Definitely not.
Yep.
Other groups were present, or at least moved through here. You have the Edomites, connected to the hills of Edom just across the Arava Valley to the east.
That landscape with the reddish rock.
Exactly. Edom means red. And intriguingly, they might have found evidence of an Edomite cultic installation, like a shrine, right there at the Hazeva site from that period. And you also have mentions of the Midianites in the broader region, famously connected to Moses meeting his father-in-law Jethro in this kind of desert landscape.
What about the Nabateans? They're famous for desert trade routes.
Good question. But it's important to place them correctly in time. The Nabateans are much later. We're talking the Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, even early Islamic periods.
Okay, different era entirely.
Completely different era. Their story is fascinating. They started as nomads, became masters of desert trade, built Petra, eventually settled down, adopted aspects of Greek and Roman culture, then Christianity, then Islam.
Right.
Their major trade routes, like the famous Spice Road running from the Mediterranean coast down towards Petra, did cross parts of this region, absolutely. But their main focus, their big infrastructure, was more on their primary north-south axis further east. They were definitely around Hazeva, but it wasn't central to their main network in the same way Petra was.
Okay, fast forward again. Modern times at Hazeva, you see signs of recent history, too.
You do. You find modern military installations, trenches from maybe the mid-20th century, sometimes built right over the ancient archaeological remains, more layers of history.
And there's a specific community associated with the site today.
Yes, the site today is maintained and somewhat interpreted by a modern community. It's primarily composed of Messianic Jews, many of whom aren't ethnically Jewish themselves, and they're notably supportive of the Zionist movement.
How so?
You'll see displays like pictures of key figures from Zionist history. It's a contemporary aspect of the site, not directly tied to the ancient stuff we've been discussing, but it's part of the present reality there. We're just noting what the sources observe at the site today.
Got it. And for most people traveling now, Hazaleva and the Arava, it's mainly a stop on that long drive down to Eilat, right?
Pretty much. It's a 4.5 hour drive minimum. So these places offer a chance to break it up, maybe stop for a quick activity, or even stay overnight.
Is there potential for more there, though, tourism-wise?
There's definitely a growing recognition of the potential, especially for desert tourism in the winter. People from Northern Europe looking for sun and warmth.
Right.
The sources talk about a growing range of activities, hiking trails, bike paths, jeep tours, even things like horseback riding or desert yoga retreats. The potential is clearly there, but maybe it's not fully realized or appreciated by everyone yet.
There's a great little personal story in the notes about meeting someone there, David from Florida.
Yeah, David, he was handling maintenance, garbage collection, kind of holding down the fort until the next volunteer or caretaker arrived. A local resident, originally from Florida.
And he shared a fascinating local story about Turkish gold.
Oh yeah, this was great. He told this story, apparently a local Bedouin tale, that during World War I, Turkish soldiers retreating from the British buried a cache of gold near a prominent old tree at Hazeva.
No way.
Yes. And according to the story, there's supposedly a treasure map, and people are still looking for it. He said you can see places where the ground near the tree has clearly been dug up multiple times over the years. A modern legend layered onto the ancient site.
That's brilliant. Okay, looking at the Arava's economy now, there's a shift happening, away from farming.
Yeah, a noticeable shift. Agriculture, which used to be the dominant thing, is receding. It's just getting harder and harder for families to make a living solely from farming anymore.
So what's the focus now?
It's growing towards tourism, developing other kinds of businesses. There's a goal to try and increase the population in the Arava settlements, but to do it in a way that still maintains the unique desert character of the place.
What makes farming so tough there? We talked about the heat.
Well, the biggest challenge is water, obviously. It's incredibly intensive farming because there's so little rain. We learned earlier that technically a desert is defined as a place getting less than 200 millimeters, about 8 inches, of rain per year.
And why that number specifically?
Because below 200 millimeter, you generally cannot grow staple rain-fed crops like wheat or barley. You're completely reliant on irrigation.
And Eilat, way down at the southern tip, gets how much?
On average, a shocking 20 millimeters, maybe less than an inch a year.
Wow. Compare that to?
Well, Jerusalem gets somewhere in the low 500s. Haifa or parts of the Golan can get significantly more, maybe 600 to 800 millimeters. And some places, like northeast India, get thousands. So 20 millimeters is incredibly dry.
But it's not just the low amount, is it? It's also unreliable.
Exactly. That's what researchers call its patchiness.
Mm-hmm.
The rainfall is extremely variable, both in time and space. Meaning you can have one year with okay rain, maybe 50 millimeter, followed by many years with virtually none. That's patchiness in time. And geographically, you can have significant rain in, say, Aqaba, just across the border, while Eilat gets nothing. Or Yadvada, just 40 kilometers north, might get double what Eilat gets. It's very localized when it does rain.
And then there's the evaporation.
Oh, yeah. The potential evaporation in Eilat is estimated something like 3,300 millimeters a year.
Wait, potential evaporation?
Yeah, think of it like this. If you put out an open barrel of water, the amount that could evaporate over a year due to sun and dry air is about 3.3 meters deep.
So the air wants to suck up 160 times more water than actually falls as rain.
Basically, yes. It's a massive water deficit. Eilat and the Sahara Desert are actually on the same latitude, influenced by the same global weather patterns that create these arid zones.
Any other challenges for plants?
One detail mentioned is that Eilat specifically lacks significant dew. In some other deserts, like the Negev highlands around Sled-Boker, which gets a bit more rain anyway, dew can actually be a surprisingly important source of moisture for certain plants. Eilat doesn't really have that.
So low rain, patchy rain, massive evaporation, no dew, and the soil.
The soil adds another challenge. It naturally has high levels of salt. So farmers have to use what's called technical irrigation. They basically have to constantly flush the soil with extra water to leach the salts down below the root zone.
Wow, yet they still grow things.
They do. Peppers, tomatoes, melons, watermelons, flowers, dates, even things you might not expect like mangoes. But it takes incredible effort and technology.
Where does the water for all this irrigation come from?
Historically, and still primarily, it comes from drilling deep wells into fossil aquifers.
Fossil aquifers?
Yeah, these are underground layers of rock or porous sediment holding water that seeped down maybe thousands, even millions of years ago. They're tapping into about 5 different deep aquifers under the Arava.
Is the water good?
It's often warm because it comes from deep down, and it usually needs some treatment before it can be used for irrigation. In the last few years, maybe 2 or 3, they've also connected the Arava region to Israel's national water carrier system.
Does that help?
It definitely helps supplement the supply. But even so, preparing new land for agriculture or new settlers is incredibly expensive because of the water infrastructure needed.
It sounds like farming there today is just much less secure than it used to be.
That's the sense you get. Farmers know their input costs, water, energy, fertilizer are very high, but the prices they get for their produce can fluctuate wildly. The profitability isn't what it once was.
And historically, the Arava was different from other parts of Israel. Fewer ancient towns?
Generally, yes. Its history is distinct. As we saw with Hazeva and En Gedi, there were key points. But overall, it seems to have been more of a place people passed through for most of history.
Like those trade routes.
Exactly. The Nabatean spice road crossed it. Roman roads were built across it. It was a transit zone, more than a place for widespread permanent settlement. Although you do find some modest sites from various periods, prehistoric campsites, some early Islamic farmsteads here and there.
And today they're trying to develop it more, but there are limits.
Right. There are ideas floating around for unique attractions. Yeah. Maybe showcasing the huge tractors used in desert farming, setting up flight schools, maybe even camel racing, trying to draw tourism. But large parts of the Arava are designated as nature reserves or used as military training areas, which naturally limits where and how much development can happen.
It's a big change from when Arava agriculture was, what, 60% of Israel's vegetable exports?
Yeah, a huge chunk of the national agricultural output came from here not so long ago. That economic role has definitely shifted. And digging even deeper, the sources mention this layer of mystery from the Calculithic period.
Way back.
Way back, like roughly 7,000 to maybe 5,500 years ago or 5,000 BCE. People lived in the Arava during that time, maybe for 1,000 years or so.
But we don't know much about them.
Very little. We don't know what they call themselves, their ethnicity, their language. Very few burial sites have been found. They're just this enigmatic presence in the deep past of this landscape. Another layer of mystery.
Wow. Okay, what a journey through these sources today. We've really covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We really have.
From those ancient settlements like En Gedi, with its, secret perfume economy driving things,
Yeah.
to the strategic importance of forts like Hazeva on those ancient routes. Then jumping forward to the modern Arava, looking at the really unique challenges, but also the surprising potential there today.
And finally, digging into the actual environment itself, just how extreme that desert really is.
Diving into all this material, it really gives you a much richer, more textured understanding of the place, doesn't it? It's not just empty desert.
Absolutely. It's a landscape that has seen such diverse human activity, and it's demanded incredible adaptation from everyone who's tried to live there or even just pass through over thousands of years.
When you think about it, that contrast between, say, the ancient community guarding its balsam secret at En Gedi and the modern farmer battling salts and water scarcity today,
Like that.
it really makes you consider the sheer resilience, the ingenuity needed.
Yeah, just to survive, let alone thrive in such a demanding place, both back then and right now.
It really makes you think.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe mull over. Considering that secret balsam knowledge or the immense effort of modern desert agriculture, what are the often hidden, maybe overlooked sources of value or knowledge or resilience that allow communities or even entire places to endure? How do they manage to potentially flourish in really challenging environments, even when from the outside they might look marginal or almost impossible?